Let me just start this off by saying this is kind of a long story, but I need to get it off my chest. I'm Lexi, 25, and I've got a stepsister, Brianna, who's 26. We've also got two younger half-siblings, but this is really about me and Brianna. Well, mostly about how she's been a total nightmare since the moment our parents got married. I was 7 when my mom married her dad, and I guess I was supposed to be happy about gaining a new family and all that. But from the very first day, Brianna made it crystal clear she didn't want me around. Like, I honestly don't even know why. She just hated me right off the bat. I tried to be nice like any 7-year-old would, right? I thought maybe we could be friends, hang out, maybe play together or whatever kids do. But nope, she wasn't having any of it. She would just look at me like I was trash or something. You know that look where someone doesn't even want to acknowledge you exist? Yeah, that was Brianna. It didn't matter what I did. She would always make sure I knew she didn't want me around. At first, I thought maybe it was because I was the new kid in the family or something. Maybe she was mad about our parents getting married. But as time went on, it became clear that it wasn't just that. She just genuinely didn't like me. At school, it was even worse. We went to the same elementary school, and she made sure everyone knew we weren't real sisters. She would say things like, "Oh, she's just my stepsister," or "We're not actually related," whenever someone brought it up. And she didn't stop there. She'd go out of her way to embarrass me in front of other kids. I remember one time during recess, she told the other kids that I wasn't part of her family and that her dad only married my mom because she needed somewhere to live. I was 7. How are you going to be that cruel to a kid who's just trying to figure out how families work? Her dad, my stepdad, saw what was going on and tried to step in a few times. He'd tell her to knock it off, that we were all family now, and she needed to treat me better. For a while, I think it kind of worked. She stopped being as mean in front of him. But the second he wasn't around, she'd go right back to being a complete jerk. It's like she took pleasure in making me feel like I didn't belong. And honestly, as a little kid, I didn't know how to handle that. I was already trying to adjust to this whole new family situation, and having someone actively reject me made it so much harder. I'd go home after school crying some days, telling my mom about how Brianna was treating me, and she'd always say the same thing. "She'll come around, just give her time." Spoiler alert, she never came around. Brianna even started trying to get our younger half-siblings involved. Like she'd tell them I wasn't their real sister and that they shouldn't listen to me or hang out with me. This was when they were little, so they didn't really understand what was going on. But still, the fact that she would even try to pull them into her little hate campaign against me? That's messed up, right? She was always trying to find new ways to get under my skin. Now, I'm not going to say my whole childhood was horrible because of Brianna. I had good times too, especially with my mom and stepdad. They did their best to make me feel included, and they were supportive whenever I talked about how Brianna was treating me. But there was always that cloud hanging over me, knowing that the one person who should have been my closest ally in all this, my stepsister, wanted nothing to do with me. And when she did want something to do with me, it was just to make me miserable. I think the worst part was when she started spreading rumors about me at school. There was this one time in middle school when Brianna told a bunch of kids that I had stolen something from her, which I hadn't. But kids being kids, they believed her, and suddenly I was the thief at school. It was humiliating, and she knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't just being mean, she was actively trying to ruin my life. Eventually, it got to the point where my stepdad had to step in big time. Brianna's attitude was so bad that she stopped coming over to our house for a while. He told her straight up that if she couldn't at least pretend to be civil, then she shouldn't bother coming around at all. I don't know if that was the right move, but honestly, it was kind of a relief. At least I didn't have to deal with her constantly being in my face, making me feel like crap. She eventually moved in with her mom full-time when she was around 13 or so. I thought maybe that would be the end of it, like maybe the distance would give her some perspective or something. But nope, it didn't. We still saw each other sometimes, holidays, birthdays, that sort of thing. And every single time, she made it clear that nothing had changed. She was still just as cruel, just as dismissive, and just as determined to make me feel like an outsider in my own family. By the time we were teenagers, I had pretty much given up on trying to have any sort of relationship with her. I mean, what was the point? I'd spent years trying to be nice, trying to reach out, and she had never once made any effort to meet me halfway, so I just stopped caring. If she wanted to pretend I didn't exist, then fine. I wasn't going to waste any more energy on her. I remember the last time we had any kind of interaction that wasn't straight up hostile. We were 16, and she had just had her first kid. Yeah, she got pregnant at 16 and moved back in with us for a while. You'd think maybe motherhood would change her, soften her or something, right? Nah. She was the same Brianna. If anything, she got worse. She wouldn't let me anywhere near her baby. She told me to never touch her kid, never talk to them, never even look at them. Like I was some kind of monster she needed to protect her child from. It was at that point that I knew for sure there was never going to be any kind of sisterly bond between us. She made sure of that. And honestly, I was done trying. I had my own life to focus on, and if she wanted to be a bitter, hateful person, that was her choice. but I wasn't going to let her drag me down with her anymore. So yeah, that's where it all started. It's been years since we last saw each other, and honestly, I thought I was done with her. But as it turns out, she wasn't done with me. Alright, so where I left off, I hadn't seen or talked to Brianna in years, and I was honestly cool with that. My life was moving along fine without her drama, and I was doing my own thing. But then, a couple of months ago, I got this phone call from my mom. Now, my mom isn't one to call me for no reason, so I immediately knew something was up. I picked up the phone and she's like, "Hey Lexi, there's something we need to talk about." Right away, I'm thinking, great, what now? My mom has this way of sugarcoating stuff, so I already knew whatever she was about to say was probably bad news. She starts off all casual, telling me about how Brianna has had a really hard time lately. Apparently, she lost her job a few months ago, and then not long after that, she lost her house. Now she's living with my mom and stepdad along with her 4 kids, and things are, in her words, a bit tense. At this point, I'm still just listening, but I'm not exactly feeling sorry for Brianna. I mean, after everything she's done, how can I? But then my mom drops the bomb. Brianna's been asking if she and the kids can stay with me for a while. I swear, I almost dropped my phone. Like, what? Stay with me? The same person who couldn't stand me for years now wants to move into my house with 4 kids. I didn't even know how to respond at first. I just kind of sat there in silence for a minute, trying to process it all. My mom took that as her chance to keep talking, telling me about how cramped their house is and how it would be really helpful if I could take Brianna in for a little bit, just until she gets back on her feet. Now here's the thing. I've worked hard to get where I am. I've got my own place, a job I'm proud of, and a life that's finally drama-free. The last thing I want is to throw Brianna and her chaos into the mix. Plus, 4 kids? That's not a little bit of help. That's a whole new life I didn't sign up for. So I just said, "Mom, I don't think that's a good idea." Of course, she tried to talk me into it. "Lexi, she's your sister, she's family. Don't you think you should help her out?" But honestly, family or not, there's a limit to what I'm willing to deal with, and Brianna passed that limit a long time ago. I told my mom, "Look, I get that she's in a tough spot, but she's never treated me like family. She made her bed, and now she has to lie in it." My mom didn't exactly like hearing that, but I wasn't about to let her guilt me into something I knew I'd regret. And that's when things really took a turn. The very next day, Brianna called me herself. Now, mind you, I hadn't heard her voice in years. So when I saw her name pop up on my phone, my heart started racing a little bit. I wasn't even sure if I should answer it, but I figured I might as well get it over with. So I picked up, and before I could even say hello, she jumped straight into it. "Lexi, I need your help," she said, not even bothering with pleasantries. She sounded desperate, which I guess made sense given the situation, but it still caught me off guard. I mean, this is someone who spent her whole life acting like I didn't exist, and now she's asking me for help like we're suddenly best friends. She went on to explain that she and her kids were crammed into a tiny room at my parents' house and that it wasn't working out. There was no space, her kids were constantly fighting, and she was at her wits' end. I listened, but all I could think about was how she treated me like garbage for years, and now she expected me to swoop in and save her. Then she hit me with the wildest part. She didn't just want to stay with me, she wanted me to move out of my house and move back in with our parents so she and her kids could take over my place. I swear, I almost laughed out loud when she said it. Like, is she for real? She basically told me that she needed my house more than I did, and that I could help the family by making the sacrifice. I was stunned. I couldn't even form words for a second. When I finally did respond, all I could manage was, "Wait, you want me to move out of my house for you?" I was hoping I misunderstood or something, but nope, she doubled down. "Yes," she said, like it was the most normal request in the world. "You can go live with Mom and Dad for a while. They have plenty of space. It's just until I get back on my feet." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This woman, who had made my life a living hell, was now trying to kick me out of my own home. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool, and said, "Brianna, that's not going to happen. I'm not giving up my house. I worked hard for it, and I'm not about to hand it over to you." That's when she lost it. She started yelling, calling me selfish, saying I didn't care about family, that I was leaving her out to dry. She even threw in the fact that I don't have kids, like that somehow made me less deserving of my own home. She was full-on guilt-tripping me, trying to make me feel bad for not helping her out. But here's the thing. I wasn't going to fall for it. Not this time. I'd spent years trying to make peace with her, trying to be the bigger person. And where did it get me? Nowhere. So I just calmly said, "Brianna, I'm sorry you're in this situation, but it's not my responsibility to fix it. You've never wanted anything to do with me, and now, all of a sudden, I'm supposed to uproot my life for you? No." That didn't go over well. She started screaming even louder, telling me I was a horrible person, that I was turning my back on my own family. It was honestly pretty shocking how fast she turned from desperate to angry. I didn't know what else to say, so I just hung up the phone. After that, I didn't hear from her for a while. I figured she had gotten the message, but I was wrong. A few days later, my mom called again, and this time she was really upset. Apparently, Brianna had been complaining to her nonstop about how I was being selfish and unwilling to help. My mom, bless her heart, was still trying to play peacemaker. "Can't you just let her stay for a little while?" She really needs help, Lexi. But I wasn't budging. I told my mom the same thing I told Brianna. I'm not giving up my house, and I'm not letting her walk all over me. I've had enough of her crap. My mom wasn't happy, but I could tell she was starting to get where I was coming from. Brianna's entitlement was off the charts, and even my mom couldn't deny that. Still, she was stuck in the middle, trying to keep the peace between her two daughters. But I wasn't about to let Brianna use that to manipulate me anymore. Update 1. Alright, so after the whole phone call mess with Brianna, I was feeling pretty good about standing my ground. I figured she'd either find another solution or keep complaining to our parents until they got sick of her. Either way, it was out of my hands, and I could finally get back to living my life. Or so I thought. A couple of weeks later, I was sitting at home on a Saturday, just minding my own business when there was a knock at my door. Now, I don't really get many visitors, so I was a little confused. I wasn't expecting anyone, and honestly, I kind of hoped it was just some delivery guy with a package or something. But when I opened the door, guess who was standing there? Yep, Brianna. She was standing on my doorstep with all 4 of her kids and a bunch of suitcases. My stomach dropped. Seriously, I just stood there for a second, not even knowing what to say. She looked at me with this dead serious expression and said, "Lexi, we need to talk." I felt my face get hot. I wasn't mad at first. I was more shocked than anything. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my cool. Her kids were all standing there, looking tired and kind of confused, and I felt bad for them. But I couldn't believe she actually showed up like this. Brianna sighed, like she was annoyed with me, which made no sense. "Look, Lexi, I've got nowhere else to go. It's too cramped at Mom and Dad's, and they're getting frustrated with me. I thought you'd have a little more empathy, considering we're family." I could feel my jaw tighten. Empathy? After everything she put me through, she wanted to play the family card now? I was still trying to wrap my head around the fact that she was standing on my porch, clearly expecting me to just let her and her kids move in. I wasn't having it. "Brianna," I said, trying my best not to lose my temper, "I already told you I'm not letting you stay here. I don't know why you thought showing up unannounced would change anything." She rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. "You're being ridiculous. It's not like I'm asking for much. We'll only be here for a little while, just until I can find a new job and a place for the kids." At that point, I could feel the anger bubbling up. "You're not staying here," I said, louder this time. "I'm sorry you're in a tough spot, but you've never wanted anything to do with me, and now you expect me to just drop everything for you?" Her kids were starting to get restless. And I could tell this conversation wasn't going to go anywhere good. Brianna, of course, wasn't giving up that easily. She shifted her weight and said, "It's not just about me, Lexi. Think about the kids. They need somewhere stable. Don't you care about them?" Okay, let me pause for a second here. Of course, I care about the kids. They didn't do anything wrong, and it's not their fault their mom put them in this situation. But that doesn't mean it's my responsibility to fix everything. I had no connection to them, thanks to Brianna making sure I was never part of their lives. So while I felt for them, I wasn't about to let her guilt me into taking them in. "I care," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But you made it clear a long time ago that I wasn't part of their lives. You didn't want me near them. Now, all of a sudden I'm supposed to play the hero?" She huffed and glared at me. "It's not about the past anymore, Lexi. You need to grow up. Things are different now. I'm asking you as a mother, not as your stepsister." I couldn't believe the nerve of her, as if her being a mother erased all the crap she put me through growing up. I took a deep breath, knowing this wasn't going to end well. "Brianna, I'm not doing this. You need to leave." Her face twisted into something like a mix of anger and desperation. "So that's it? You're just going to turn your back on me? On the kids? After everything we've been through, you're just going to let us suffer?" At that point, I was done. I was trying to stay calm for the sake of the kids, but her entitlement was too much. "You made your choice a long time ago," I said firmly. "You didn't want me in your life then, and I'm not letting you use me now." Now she glared at me, her eyes narrowed. "You're unbelievable. You really think you're better than me, don't you?" That hit a nerve. I wasn't trying to act like I was better than her. I just wasn't about to let her walk all over me. But before I could even respond, her oldest kid, who looked like she was around 10 or so, tugged on Brianna's arm and said, "Mom, can we go? I'm tired." Brianna glanced down at her, and for a second I thought maybe she'd give up and leave. But nope. She turned back to me and said, "You're making a huge mistake, Lexi. Don't think I'm going to forget this." And with that, she stormed off, her kids trailing behind her. I watched as they loaded back into their car, Brianna muttering under her breath the whole time. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or just angry. Probably a mix of both. As they drove off, I shut the door and leaned against it, trying to process what just happened. I mean, I knew Brianna was entitled, but showing up at my house with her kids and expecting me to just roll over like that, it blew my mind. I felt bad for her kids. They didn't deserve any of this. But I wasn't about to let Brianna manipulate me into giving up my home. After she left, I called my mom to let her know what happened. She wasn't surprised, but she did sound disappointed that I didn't help. "I understand, Lexi," she said, "but Brianna's in a really tough spot right now. Maybe there's another way you can help." But I had already made up my mind. "Mom, I'm not getting involved. I can't. She's never treated me like family, and I'm not about to let her drag me down into her mess. My mom sighed. I just wish things were different. Me too, I said, and I meant it, but some things never change, and Brianna was one of them. Update 2. After Brianna and her kids left, I thought maybe that was the end of it. Like she'd finally understand that I wasn't going to give in, and she'd move on to bothering someone else. But of course, that's not how it worked out. Honestly, I should have known better. It didn't take long before things escalated in a way I wasn't expecting. A few days after her dramatic visit, I got another call from my mom. Now, this wasn't unusual. She and I talked fairly often, but the second I answered, I could tell something was up. Her voice was tight, like she was stressed or trying not to yell, which immediately put me on edge. "Lexi, I need to talk to you about what happened with Brianna," she said, jumping straight into it. I sighed. "Mom, I already told you what happened. She showed up at my house, and I told her she couldn't stay here." "Yeah, well, she's been talking to your stepdad and me nonstop since then, saying how unfair you're being. She's claiming you're turning your back on family." She hesitated, and she's saying we should be cutting you off for not helping her. I was stunned for a second. Like Brianna was really out here trying to turn my own mom and stepdad against me because I wouldn't let her take over my house? The audacity. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Wait, she's telling you guys to cut me off?" "Pretty much," Mom replied. "She's making it sound like you're heartless for not helping her and the kids when they need it. She's really got your stepdad all worked up. He's been talking about how we should be doing more to support her as a family." I couldn't believe it. "Mom, you know that's ridiculous, right? She's trying to manipulate you because I won't give her what she wants." Mom sighed. "I know, Lexi. I get it. But things are getting tense here. Your stepdad feels like we should be supporting her more, especially with the kids involved. And Brianna, well, you know how she is. She's making us feel like we're failing her as parents." I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache coming on. This was exactly what I was afraid of. Brianna was pulling everyone into her drama and making me the villain for not bending to her demands. "Mom, listen. I get that she's in a bad spot, but that doesn't mean I'm responsible for fixing her problems. I've been more than clear about why I can't help her." "I know," Mom said softly, "but you need to understand that your stepdad is struggling with this. He doesn't like seeing his daughter in such a rough place, and he feels like we should be doing more to make sure the kids are okay." And there it was, the guilt trip. It wasn't even Mom doing it on purpose, but hearing her talk about the kids like that made me feel like I was the bad guy. But I wasn't. I knew that Brianna was using her kids as pawns in her little game, and I wasn't about to let myself get played. "Mom, I'm not going to let Brianna guilt me into anything. I understand that the kids are in a tough spot, but that's on her, not me. She's the one who's made her choices, and now she has to deal with the consequences." Mom was quiet for a moment, and I could tell she was trying to figure out what to say next. Finally, she spoke. "Lexi, I wish things weren't like this. I hate seeing the family so divided." "Me too," I said, my voice softer now. "But this isn't on me, Mom. Brianna has been treating me like I don't exist for years, and now all of a sudden she wants my help? That's not how family works." There was another pause, and then she sighed. "I know you're right, but just be prepared, Lexi. Your stepdad is really upset, and I'm worried he's going to take Brianna's side in all of this." That hit me harder than I expected. I'd always had a decent relationship with my stepdad, and the thought of him turning on me because of Brianna's manipulations made me feel sick. But I couldn't back down now. I had to stand my ground no matter how messy things got. "Thanks for the heads up, Mom," I said quietly, "but I'm not going to change my mind." "I know," she replied. "Just be careful, okay? I don't want this to get any worse." After we hung up, I couldn't help but feel this knot in my stomach. It was like no matter what I did, Brianna was determined to drag me into her mess, and now she was turning my stepdad against me too. It was exhausting, and honestly, I wasn't sure how much more of this I could take. But of course, Brianna wasn't done. A few days later, I started getting calls from other family members, people I hadn't talked to in months. My aunt, my cousin, even some distant relatives on my stepdad's side. Every single one of them had the same story. Brianna had been going around telling them how I'd refused to help her when she was desperate and homeless, painting me as the villain in her little sob story. It was infuriating. I knew she was manipulative, but this was a new low even for her. I spent half my time fielding calls from concerned relatives, all of them trying to guilt me into doing the right thing by helping her out. I couldn't believe how easily she'd managed to get them on her side, even though none of them knew the full story. At one point, my cousin, who I hadn't spoken to in over a year, called me up and started lecturing me about family values and how I was letting my pride get in the way of helping someone in need. I was so close to losing it, but I managed to keep my cool long enough to explain my side of the story. "Look," I told her, "you don't know the half of it. Brianna's been treating me like dirt since we were kids. Now she wants me to give up my home for her? That's not happening." My cousin tried to argue, saying that people change and that Brianna was just trying to survive, but I wasn't having it. "She hasn't changed at all," I said, my voice firm. "She's just using this situation to get what she wants. I'm not falling for it." By the time we hung up, I was exhausted. I couldn't believe how much energy Brianna was draining from me, even when she wasn't physically in my life. It was like she'd found a way to invade my space without even being there. As the days went on, the calls finally started to die down, but the tension with my mom and stepdad was still there. Every conversation felt like walking on eggshells, and I could tell they were struggling to balance their loyalty to me with their guilt over Brianna. It was a mess, and I hated that it had come to this. But no matter how much pressure they put on me, I wasn't going to give in. Brianna had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. And if that meant I had to be the bad guy in her story, so be it. Update 3. So after all the chaos of Brianna trying to weasel her way into my life and my house, you'd think things might finally calm down, right? Wrong. Because of course, Brianna had one more trick up her sleeve. This time though, it wasn't just phone calls or guilt trips from relatives. It was something way worse. It started with a knock on the door. Now after everything that had happened, I was a little paranoid about people just showing up at my place unannounced, so I wasn't exactly thrilled to hear knocking. I checked the peephole, and there was a man standing there in a uniform. My heart sank because I immediately thought something bad had happened. I opened the door, and he handed me an envelope and said, "You've been served." I stared at the envelope, confused and a little freaked out. I hadn't done anything wrong, so what was this about? I opened it right there, and to my absolute shock, I was looking at some kind of legal paperwork. It took me a second to process it, but when I finally understood what I was reading, I couldn't believe it. Brianna was suing me. For what? To force me to let her and her kids stay in my house. I'm not kidding. She had actually gone and filed some kind of claim that I was denying her housing or some nonsense, trying to legally force me to give up my home for her and her kids. I could barely even comprehend it. I mean, who does that? She couldn't guilt me into it, so now she was trying to legally take my home. I felt this wave of anger and disbelief wash over me. I didn't even know you could do something like that. I called my mom immediately and told her what happened. She was just as shocked as I was. "That can't be real," she said. "There's no way she can do that." But it was real. I double-checked the paperwork, and sure enough, Brianna had actually gone to a lawyer to try and pull this off. I was in total disbelief. I called a lawyer myself to figure out what my options were, and thankfully, he reassured me that this whole thing was ridiculous and there was no way it would hold up in court. Still, the fact that Brianna had even tried something like this was insane. The lawyer told me not to worry too much, but we'd still have to deal with it legally, so we started prepping. I couldn't believe it had come to this. I mean, it's one thing to have a toxic family member who tries to take advantage of you, but to actually sue your own stepsister because she won't give you her house? That's a whole new level of entitlement. A few weeks later, we had the court date set, and I was feeling pretty nervous. I knew I had the law on my side, but I also knew how manipulative Brianna could be. I was worried she'd try to spin the situation to make me look like the bad guy again, like she'd been doing with our family. But there was no turning back now. We had to go through with it. When the day finally came, I walked into that courtroom feeling a mix of anxiety and anger. Brianna was already there with her lawyer, and when I saw her, I swear she didn't even look worried. If anything, she looked smug, like she actually thought she was going to win. I sat down with my lawyer, and we started going over everything. The judge called us up, and Brianna's lawyer started making this whole case about how she was a struggling mother of 4, and I had refused to provide housing for her in her time of need. The way they talked, you'd think I was some kind of heartless monster who kicked her and her kids out onto the street. I couldn't believe the lengths she was going to make me look bad. She didn't mention, of course, how she'd been horrible to me for years, or how she'd tried to manipulate me into giving up my house. It was all about how she was a single mom just trying to provide for her kids, and how I was the selfish stepsister standing in her way. When it was our turn, my lawyer laid everything out. He explained how Brianna had never wanted anything to do with me until she needed something, how she had shown up at my house unannounced, demanding that I move out so she could move in, and how she'd been trying to guilt me into helping her, even though we had no real relationship. The judge listened carefully, and I could see him nodding along, understanding where I was coming from. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. The judge turned to Brianna and asked her point blank, "Why do you believe you are entitled to your stepsister's home?" And that's when it all fell apart for her. She stuttered and tried to make it about the kids again, but the judge wasn't having it. He cut her off and basically told her that this was a ridiculous claim. Hearing the judge say that out loud was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. Brianna hasn't contacted me since, and honestly, I'm okay with that. I've got my life back, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm in control again. So yeah, that's the story of how my stepsister tried to take my house and ended up losing everything. It's not exactly the happy ending I wanted, but at least now I know where I stand. And honestly, I'm just glad it's over.